Let's talk a little bit about what happened in Georgia last night. There was an election yesterday. There was an enormous, I don't know how to phrase this. The number of polling places that have been available that have been closed, not even as a function of coronavirus, but in Georgia over the past couple of years as a function of the Supreme Court rolling back or gutting really the pre-clearance measures in the Voting Rights Act. Just to remind people, Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, there were about 16, I think maybe it's 12 states or 14 states, and then an additional counties within states. In New York, there were two counties, like Queens County and one other, that were under pre-clearance because they had a history of disenfranchising minority voters. And pre-clearance basically meant that if you did anything to change your voting procedures, if you closed polling places in a certain amount or a certain percentage, if you restricted hours in which you're going to vote, if you restricted days, if you inhibited absentee ballot, whatever it was, any change to your voting needed to be proposed to the Department of Justice, and they needed to sign off on it. So the burden of proof was on the applicants, these states, which had a history of racially discriminating against different people in terms of voting. And so the burden of proof is on them to show that this is not going to inhibit people's right to vote. The Supreme Court, even though a virtually unanimous Senate, I think it was 96-4 in 2007, which means that the vast majority of Republicans even reauthorized the Voting Rights Act. In 2011, maybe it was 2014, somewhere around there. I
actually think it was 2013, not to be contrary in the middle of your numbers, but when Robert stripped it,
area, the Supreme Court basically ruled that, in the words of Scalia, they did the Senate reauthorized it because they were afraid, because it was just too much of a hot potato. And remember, these are the guys who are like, we can't be activists, judges. In other words, we can't thwart the will of the legislature. And they said, and I think John Roberts basically said, look, racism is basically over. It's not a fair. You can have the concept of preclearance. It's just that the way that it's been determined who's subjected to it is not fair to these states. And so the formula was destroyed. And they said, we will throw it back to Congress to come up with a new formula. And of course, it's Republicans controlling at least one house during all that time. So that was dead in the water. Democrats, the first bill that they passed was a reauthorization of that Section 5, but that dead in the water because the Republican Senate's not going to pass it. Since that time.
Can I just quote really quick? I'm sorry.
Yes.
This is 2013. Because the disparate treatment of the states is, quote, based on 40-year-old facts having no logical relationship to the present day.
Racism's over.
That's it.
So they, and since that time, all of those states changed their voting rules in some fashion or another that have disenfranchised hundreds of thousands of people. Here is a drone shot of voting lines in the Georgia primary last night. People were in line for 12 hours trying to vote. This is nuts. These are lines of people looking to vote. They needed a drone shot to get this. It's just insanity. I mean, you have people who are 5 or 6 feet apart from each other, but regardless, it's still insanity. And they're just making it very, very hard to vote. They're basically setting it up so that when the general election comes in the fall, they're like, well, it's not like this is unprecedented. I mean, we have to get over the notion that we're going to get vote tallies incidentally on election day. That's not happening this year. Maybe in the future because of all the absentee balloting that's going on and the procedures that people are going to have to. But look at that. It just goes on and on and on. This is absurd. This is absurd that it's this difficult to vote. You know, you hear like, remember like the big talking point about if Bernie Sanders got the nomination, you'd see all the right wingers going into, supermarkets and going like long lines. That's what you're going to get. You're going to get long lines to go to the supermarket. Well, what about these massive, massive lines to go and exercise like the bedrock fundamental right of self-determination, right? That we pride ourselves on.
Right.
And here is Doug Collins, who is one of 21 people looking to unseat Loeffler, or run, I should say. She's the incumbent, but was it Sessions? Who was it? I can't even remember whose seat it was.
It was Sonny Purdue, right?
No, Purdue.
Johnny Isakson.
Isakson. Sorry. And Purdue was governor.
Purdue is the other senator.
They're both up now.
And they're both up for re-election.
Because Purdue's ag, right?
David Perdue is up for re-election. Isaacson is stepped down. So there's a special.
So who's Trump's agriculture secretary?
Sonny Perdue.
Is that the former governor? Whatever. It doesn't matter. All right, whatever. George has got.
Here is Collins, who is running against one of the people running against Kelly Loeffler, and it's a special election that's going to take place on the same day in November. So there is no primary. It's just basically one of these like jungle elections where it's like 21 people literally running. I think
free for all.
But here he is explaining like, "Hey, man. It is what it is."
As well, y'all got those new voting machines, those touchscreen machines, but people were complaining because they were in line for 3 hours plus there too. The problem is, the worry is November.
People weren't in line for 3 hours plus. People were in line for 8 hours. We're good.
But people were complaining because they were in line for 3 hours plus there too. The problem is, the worry is November 3rd. What do you say about it?
Well, again, what we're seeing again in Georgia is what we've seen in previous elections. It's, again, counties are responsibility for putting up and setting up their elections as it goes, and putting enough voting machines, having enough trained workers, and to get that done. It's concerning to me that it seems like, especially in our metro areas, we seem to have the same problems over and over again. I voted on these machines early. I did it in person early voting. The touchscreens work. We're used to touchscreens in Georgia, and now it just has a paper ballot component to it. I think what we've got to do is we've got to make sure that we're doing better training. We're doing better locations, and remembering that the people like to come out and vote. People do, like your dad, like to come out and actually vote in person. It's a part of our pride as Americans to be a part of elections, but we've just got to do better planning and better training. And it seems like we always in Georgia seem to come up with the same counties in the same areas, the same problems, no matter what the machines are.
That's a coincidence. Anybody want to take a hazarded guess as to what these same counties and same places, like who's voting in those places? What a coincidence.
Quinkydink.
And I love the idea that, like, look, this is just, it's really the responsibility of like a guy named Bill and two other guys. They are, part-time dog catcher in
it's always a problem in the metro areas, and I don't understand why the local librarians can't sort out a statewide absolute lack of infrastructure to allow people to voting.
I love the idea. It's like he's presenting like this. Well, it's the first time we've had elections. So, I mean, this is something that has presumably been going on for a couple hundred years in terms of elections down there. Maybe they should get it down by now. It seems
I don't even want to.
There's no solution to it. It's this is very difficult stuff. It's like self-driving cars, sort of. There's no way to fix this, so I think we're just gonna go with it. That'll be fine.